We have two faculty members that are going to argue for armed intervention in Iraq, and then two faculty members that are opposed to any sort of military effort there. I'm going to give each faculty member 10 minutes or less, whatever they need, but no more than 10 minutes to state their case, state their ideas. And then after that's done, I'll give them an opportunity to ask a couple questions of each other, maybe one question from each individual to the other side, and then we'll open it up for you guys, because we really like it to be about you guys rather than these guys asking questions. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to jot them down, so when it comes time for it, I'll pick out people who have their hands raised, and you guys can get in on it. So I think we'll start with introductions, and I'll have these guys just introduce themselves and what department they're from. We'll start with Schlosser.
Raj Schlosser, and I teach history, and so I'm just around the corner here in the social science department.
Mike DeVivo, I do geography.
Keith St. Clair, I teach political science, also in social science department.
Juan Heredia, I teach communication courses in language and thought on the other side of the building.
The dark side.
Yeah,
The dark side.
The other side of the building. All right, now I think I just decided to do this kind of randomly, but I'm going to allow one pro-intervention, and then we'll move on to one who was opposed, and then we'll go back to pro, and then the other way around. So it'll be just kind of alternating. So we'll start with, you guys have a preference? Which one would you like to start?
Doesn't make one.
Did you develop a game plan before you arrived?
No.
I'll start.
Mr.
I'll go ahead.
DeVivo? Okay, it's all yours. 10 minutes.
War is a bad choice. I don't think anyone would disagree with the following statement. Any individual who desires war is either foolish or evil. Innocent lives maimed and lost, cultural artifacts destroyed, alliances torn, and the loss of billions of dollars are only a few items on the list that result from war. As I just said before, war is a bad choice. Unfortunately, at this time, we have no good choices, only bad ones. It's naive to think that the present situation, in which some find to be acceptable, weapons of mass destruction in the hands of a megalomaniacal Saddam Hussein, can be remedied without the threat of war. Those who desire to continue on in a Pollyanna manner while inspectors are negotiating with Saddam and his henchmen about the conduct of their inspections may be reminded of Saddam's record and his violations of the November UN resolution. The evidence strongly supports the notion that Iraq has at least 5,000 tons of chemicals and 8,000 gallons of biological agents such as mustard gases and anthrax. Moreover, Saddam controls unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, and missiles. All of these are in violation of the UN resolution and designed to transport and release biological agents in 3 areas. Zones of rebellion in Iraq, such as the Kurdish North, against invading or liberating American troops or allied troops, and Israel. Additionally, some evidence points to a link between al-Qaeda and Iraq. It's reasonable to conclude that these chemical and biological agents could easily be passed into the hands of groups who seek to engage in terrorist action in the U.S. and abroad. Oh, assuming this war occurs, which strategy and tactics will be employed, and what are the likely outcomes? No one on this panel has been made privy to intelligence information regarding strategy and tactics. However, with contingents drawn from the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions and the 82nd and 101st Airborne, troops that are geared for initial strikes and urban warfare, in addition to chemical and biological warfare, it seems likely that a large component of the battle will take place in urban areas, essentially in Baghdad, against the Special Republican Guard unlike the standard Republican Guard. The Special Republican Guard numbers about 15 to 25,000 troops and are essentially located in Baghdad to protect Saddam and his cronies. Estimates range from this war lasting 2 weeks to a few months, and depending on what expert, if you will, one consults, Iraqi reception to the Americans will be like France in World War II, liberating Americans, to perhaps joining Saddam's forces and attempting to annihilate invading Americans. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. We just don't know. Some argue that this war is all about oil. You know, we're going into Iraq because Bush and his cronies are interested in making a lot of money off of Iraqi oil. And it's a bit more complicated than that. Granted, if Iraq was the country of Nepal with few natural resources, we probably wouldn't be so eager. However, we do have to realize the reality of the situation. Iraq contains 11% of the world's proven oil resources, and it may have potential reserves that exceed Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the largest single country that holds oil reserves of 25% of the world's oil resources, and Iraq's potential reserves might amount to more than that. Despite these abundant resources, people live in poverty throughout the oil-rich Middle East as tyrants such as Saddam Hussein rule with an iron fist. And disparities in wealth are pervasive. It is this type of disparity in wealth that breeds despair and fosters illiteracy and terrorism. The rich get richer and the poor get poor, and the free world remains in a state of panic. Economies go down, alliances crumble, and despair diffuses from the third world to the more developed countries. It's been suggested that once Iraq is liberated, the oil revenue and its wealth of water resources could provide the financing for substantial economic development. Iraq's physical geography and its resources make it a great location for development. We also anticipate that if this does occur over the matter of time, the development of a middle class could occur, which would then lead to a decline in economic disparities and also foster a republican form of democracy. This is what is hoped for from reading between the lines. I'm convinced that we're compelled to take action, not merely for us, but also for the Iraqi people and to develop some security for the rest of the world. Again, we have no good choices, and war is a bad choice. But it very well might be the best choice we have.
Thanks, Mr. DeVivo. Do you guys have a preference for which one would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can go ahead.
Mr. Sinclair?
I might preface my position by saying that I am one who has a respect for the concept of international law. And although international law, I readily admit, is enforced irregularly, the fact is that even national law is not always enforced. I also believe that international law is followed most of the time for the same reason that national laws are primarily followed as well. And that is not because there is an enforcer to enforce and punish those who violate the laws, but because the laws themselves are worth obeying, because it instills in others the expectation that they will also have to obey them as well. For example, I think the laws that we have in this country, the ones that are obeyed are the ones such as rape, murder, thievery, These things are, people don't want them perpetrated on themselves, so therefore they have a vested interest in not acting on them. If they act on them, then it's hard to justify those very same actions being perpetrated against them. And I think international law works the same way. With that said, I'm not opposed to war in all circumstances, nor would I be opposed to war with Iraq in all circumstances as well. It's just that I would prefer a pretext that attempted to uphold international law as opposed to one that didn't. For example, I would be more supportive of a war with Iraq if the Security Council passed a resolution authorizing such a war. I would still have my reservations, but I could at least bring myself to support it for the respect for international law. I would also be approving of a war against Iraq if it was thought to bring someone like Saddam Hussein to before the International Criminal Court, a newly created court for violating such things as war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. It would merely require both supporting such a court, which the United States currently does not, and waiting for Saddam Hussein to violate such one of those crimes, which I'm sure it wouldn't take him long to do so. But I am not opposed to war even in violation of international law if there are such things as ethnic cleansing or genocide at work. Certainly Saddam Hussein committed those acts against the Kurds. In such a situation, I felt like we would have been well within our rights, regardless of international law, to go in and save the individuals in question, as we did in Kosovo when we saved the Albanians from the extermination by the Serbs, and just a plain massacre between the two forces. I've tried to go through and anticipate some of the arguments for war that I've heard in the media, and which I'm sure I'll hear from the other side today. One has been, and one is which is I'm sympathetic to, and that is to liberate Iraq from a ruthless dictator. Certainly I won't miss Saddam Hussein should he be gone. He is a ruthless dictator, and the world would probably be a better place without him. But if we're in the process of liberating people from ruthless dictators, then we're going to have a lot of wars immediately following this one. And where's the end of it? I think primarily the people in question have to take responsibility for themselves and overthrow their own dictators. I don't think the United States can go from one dictatorship to the next, invading one country after the other. For example, we'd be invading Cuba, I think, in no time at all as well. So I think it's unrealistic to expect us to liberate all the world's countries from all the world's dictators. Another argument I frequently hear is that Saddam Hussein will sacrifice himself and do anything, sacrifice his position, himself, to destroy the United States. Certainly, he has reason to have a lot of animosity towards the United States, since we've attacked his country weekly for the last 11 years, and because of the drumming that he got in the last war. However, I don't read Saddam Hussein's psyche that way. The way I read him is that he would do anything to save himself, and there is no principle that Saddam Hussein wouldn't sell out if it meant saving his own skin, from my read on the gentleman. I think he's killed members of his own family. I don't doubt that he would kill his own grandmother if it meant staying in power. On the one hand, this is very predictable, but it just certainly doesn't seem to gel with somebody who would actually, like Osama bin Laden, who would certainly kill himself to harm the United States in any way. But without getting inside his head, it's difficult to know. But that is my take on Saddam Hussein. In addition to that, it's been said that the war will hinder terrorism, and that Saddam Hussein, with common cause with Al-Qaeda, meaning both of them have a common enemy, the United States, seems reasonable that they might work together on occasion. If you know anything about Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, you know that they have there are enemies as well. But there is something to the old adage that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I suppose the theory is that he will receive, Al-Qaeda, that is, receive weapons of mass destruction from Saddam Hussein. I don't think that is as much a concern as a war with Iraq will actually play into Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda's hands, in that by invading an Arab country, which is precisely what Osama bin Laden has dreamed of, in his mind will unite the Arab world and the Muslim world against the United States. And I think that is a very real danger. Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein don't get along. They might find an interest in working together against their common enemy, but I don't see, I use the example of Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. They hated each other. They saw themselves with a common enemy in Adolf Hitler during World War II, but I don't think that at any moment that Winston Churchill would have gave Joseph Stalin the atom bomb from the United States or leaked him secrets on how to get one. I think, on the other hand, that war with Iraq will tend to unite the Arab world against the United States. The other argument is that inspections don't work and there's no point in waiting for them. I'd like to know for sure that inspections don't work. If inspections really don't work, then we have a bigger problem than Saddam Hussein on our hands. If inspections don't work, and if there's no way to verify that a country does not have weapons of mass destruction that don't, then we better just get used to the idea of Al-Qaeda getting their hands on them, because that is exactly what will happen. And I think it's worth our while, since we know Saddam Hussein would love to have weapons of mass destruction, and he's not in a position where he can readily get them or enhance the ones that he doesn't already have, and I presume that he does not have a nuclear weapon, otherwise we wouldn't be invading. But assuming that he does have chemical and biological weapons, it would be worth our while to continue with the inspections to find out if inspections do in fact work, if they can be found by the inspectors. Because if they can't, then we do have, as I said, a bigger problem on our hands. We don't have a regime, in other words, to verify noncompliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and in that case, like I said, we'll just have to get used to our enemies having them. The other argument I often hear is war discourages, or in this case, will discourage other countries from acquiring nuclear weapons. I think just the opposite, that the war with Iraq and the current Bush doctrine is going to ensure that other countries seek out and acquire nuclear weapons as soon as possible. The Bush doctrine, as I read it, is that if you don't have nuclear weapons, we feel free to unilaterally attack you at any time. If you do have nuclear weapons like North Korea, we guarantee you we will not attack you. I can't think of a better reason for now why countries would want to acquire nuclear weapons as soon as possible. I certainly would. The other thing I often hear is containment is too expensive. We can't afford to just keep Saddam Hussein in his box. It's very expensive. It's a drain on our resources, militarily and otherwise. I would argue that the military occupation that's going to be necessary after the conquest of Iraq is going to be much more expensive than any containment policy. I think that we're going to have to be there an indefinite number of years. I think it's going to be costly, as it makes us vulnerable to attacks by Al-Qaeda and resentment by the Arabs in Iraq itself. I think the war will be quickly won militarily. I think the occupation will be very costly in both money and blood for U.S. citizens. With that said, that pretty much sums up my policy. I believe also that this quick fix, as the Bush administration sees getting rid of Saddam, is very misplaced. It's very short-sighted. I kind of compare it to a roof that needs replaced on someone's house. You know, shingles missing, water's getting in, and it's leaking in through the bedroom. And you look at the leak in the bedroom, and you say, that needs fixed. You can try putting a pail under it and say, well, there it's contained. Or you can get annoyed with it enough to go up there and maybe caulk a little bit and paint over it and fix the crack that's caused in the ceiling of the bedroom. But the fact is the roof is what's bad. The roof needs repaired, and fixing a crack in the ceiling of the bedroom is not going to prevent the water from coming in somewhere else in the house. The whole roof needs replaced. And to me, the roof, in this case, is U.S. foreign policy, needs to be completely reshaped, completely reformatted. U.S. foreign policy as it's currently practiced in the world is angering too many of the world's people. You're never going to please everybody, granted. But the number of people that we are angering is coming back to haunt us in real ways, as we saw on September 11th. And we really need to do something about that. We need a U.S. foreign policy that does not incite such anger and resentment against the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Sinclair. Mr. Schlosser?
First of all, let me say that I'm a student of history. So many of the comments that I'm going to be making are based on historical examples, and the mere fact that Mr. Sinclair took 15 minutes instead of 10 is a classic illustration of giving more time. It doesn't make the argument stronger. It doesn't make the argument better. It just makes it longer. Anybody have a tough time parking in here today? Anybody have a difficult time getting the classes you wanted to get? I can assure you you're going to have a hard time getting a job. You might even fight over a spouse. Conflict is reality. We live in a society that is predicated upon economic competition. Sound familiar? Well, let's grow up. Competition is the name of the game. It's just that simple. World history has thrust on the shoulders of this country responsibilities and opportunities to continue history, to continue themes that have been started and themes that are constant, and possibly to change them. When you get right down to it, life is nothing more than a low-grade conflict that periodically becomes more open. With that clown that cut you off on the expressway this morning. With the person that pulled into the parking spot head-on, like George had a problem here on Seinfeld the other day, instead of backing in. Conflict happens. You didn't like the grade on the paper, you didn't like the comment on the paper. You don't even like the damn test the instructor gives you. It's a form of conflict. Only some people have the ability to respond more forcefully than others. Some have the tools. Some have the goods. Some have a sense of righteous indignation. Some certainly abuse it. But there are some that in fact have principle as well as a responsibility to respond to their position within history at this time. Now, the fact of the matter is that we've got to recognize that violence, one of those things that, well, in the Judaic-Christian tradition, it goes back to the very beginning, doesn't it? It seems to be in human nature. It's just there. And it simply becomes a question to how can you channel violence. In this country, we tend to channel violence by sports. But I've always been under the assumption that there's probably more animals up in the stadium watching than there are down on the floor participating. They know the rules. Generally, there aren't a lot of cheap shots. But you watch the guys who are watching. It's the watchers that you got to watch out for. They're the ones that blindside you. They're the ones that hit you with a damn can of beer being thrown from the upper deck. That's reality, see? T.S. Eliot once made the statement, remember in Prufrock, that some of us unfortunately don't go out with a bang. The great majority of us go out whimper. And let's face it, when it comes right down to it, the object is to channel aggression appropriately. It is to channel what comes naturally in a constructive way. And as they've said, Saddam Hussein is not going to be missed. There's probably a list of a dozen or so leaders in the world, Jong and several others, that would not be missed. And the question becomes, as the leading, if not one of the leading nations of the world, what type of responsibility do we have? If in your neighborhood there's a bully, he's not picking on your kid, but he's picking on other kids, do you not your problem, but do you have a responsibility as a human, as a citizen, as simply an adult? I think so. I really think you do. We've got to make sure that we understand, and I was just talking about it with a class this morning, those fine lines which exist between things like democracy and a mob. It was a mob that supported the execution of Socrates. It was a mob that supported Hitler as chancellor. See, you've got to be able to make a distinction between a democratic process and popularity. Mr. Sinclair feels that international relations are based on popularity. Well, maybe they should be based on principles. So the French and the Germans don't want to go along with it. And so a whole bunch of the rest of them don't want to go along with it. A lot of right things, right ideas, right courses of action are not terribly popular. But popularity is not what counts, is it? In the 20th century, history tells us that the formation of the League of Nations and then the United Nations unearthed one new principle. There will be constant war to maintain continued peace. And that is a fact. It is a fact of life. The 20th century has determined there will be constant wars. Orwell, 1984, he understood it. He wrote it about the same time as the United Nations was being formulated. There will be constant war that we will call peace. And there will be constant peace that will always include war. And that is a fact. The United States finds itself in a very unique role. We have been thrust to the forefront of maintaining peace through war and warring to maintain peace. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, like the American Empire, is trying to establish the Pax Romana, the Pax Britannia, the Pax Americana. The first Bush called it the New World Order. He watched way too much Fox television. It's the Pax Romana. It's the Pax Britannia. It's the Pax Americana. We, all of a sudden, have find ourselves no longer children, no longer adolescents. We're now the parents. And we've got to make some incredibly difficult decisions. And those decisions have largely been established by technology. Technology gives us not only possibilities, but incredible responsibilities. You Americans in this room belong to a country that is the only country that has used atomic weapons in warfare. Do you feel guilty? Hell no, you don't feel guilty. It ended a war. It saved more lives than it took. And that's a fact. It deterred other nations from aggression. That's a fact. When you open up the Russian archives in 1990, it was right there in black and white. They were scared to death of the United States of America because we not only had them, but our history showed that we'd use it. We entered the age of being parents. We will become grandparents by the middle of this next century. Let's not blow our responsibility. Let's assume it. Let's be responsible. Let's make sure it's pointed in the right direction. But let's not back away from what responsible people have to do. International law, I don't know. Respect the courts. If people were still respecting the courts in Nazi Germany, Jews would still not be people. If we respected the laws in the American South, blacks would still be on the back of the bus. Maybe once in a while, you tell the courts to go to hell. The United States must assume responsibility. And the root of the word responsible is to respond. You don't respond by sitting on your duff, giving them more time, and pretending it's going to go away. The bully at the end of the block, the clown like Saddam, isn't going to go away. Everyone in this room is going to die. Some should probably die sooner than others.
I'm afraid to move on.
Well, I don't know if I should speak up or not. I think the overriding question is Saddam Hussein present imminent danger to the United States? No one questions that this guy, Saddam Hussein, gasses and kills and tortures his own people because he has a vested interest in the outcome of that. The vested interest is that he should he should remain in power. We have backed this country, past governments, have backed dictators whose vested interest was to remain in power. Batista in Cuba, Somoza, Pinochet, Noriega, who we invaded his country and broke international law and kidnapped the man, and he's in Florida jail today. The Shah of Iran, who was ruthless and a dictator and murdered and barbecued his own people. But the vested interest was for the United States. In Chile, for instance, questions should be asked, why do people hate the United States? And I should say all the people that I know around the world say they don't hate the United States. They question the policy, the foreign policy of the United States, which is, under this administration, they come out and say, a policy led by arrogance and ignorance. And that was quoted to me by a Nobel Prize winner as I spoke with him this past summer, a former president of Costa Rica. In Chile, in 1939, Chile has the world's largest open pit copper mine. From 1939 to 1971 invested in Wall Street, from Wall Street into Chile, into that copper mine, was about $400 million. $400 million. The profit from that copper mine that did not go to Chile, that went to Wall Street, was $6,400,000,000. The people that lived around the copper mine had double the rate of infant mortality, tuberculosis, and cancer. You question why we have a vested interest and why people look at us strangely? That's a perfect example. Now, is Saddam Hussein, not crazy, a madman, willing to give up his a big fish in a small pond-ism? I don't think so. And I'm not speaking just as a person who does outside research. I'm taking the report from our own CIA, who said Saddam Hussein is not a first strike threat. Saddam Hussein is a big fish in a small pond who wants to maintain the power he has there. Why would anyone in their right mind, as Colin Powell seems to think we're all not in our right mind, seem to suggest that Osama bin Laden would get weapons of mass destruction from Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein would then give his fate to Osama bin Laden, because we can test the chemical residue of weapons of mass destruction, and we know where they come from. If Saddam Hussein gives his weapons of mass destruction, Liza said, to Osama bin Laden, those weapons will be tested and come back to Saddam Hussein. Why would a person, such a control freak as he is, want to give his destiny to someone who hates him? It doesn't make sense. The CIA says it, not our president says it, but the CIA says that. New World Order, conflict, all of these things have been brought up. We have to look at the consequence of our actions, and the consequence of our actions are going to be serious. We could classify terrorism in three profiles. There's territorial, ideological, and stateless. Territorial, the Bosques, the IRA, of which Roger is quite an expert on, and I might say, in terms of what the IRA has done over the years. And the ideological, the Red Brigade. They want to destroy the populace for the sake of showing how bad capitalism is and democracy is, and that our anarchy should reign forever. And the stateless, Al-Qaeda. Now, before I go into that, I want to ask if there's anybody in this room, or I want to ask for anybody in this room who's ever been in combat and seen combat and killed another human being for their country. Anybody?
Yes.
Okay. Where are you? All right. So there's two of us.
No, there's more.
There's where? Okay, thank you. Three of us. I was in Vietnam. And in Vietnam, conventional warfare did not work. What I saw in Vietnam was terrorism warfare. Terrorism warfare. And what we will do, if we don't go in, and I'm not saying we shouldn't necessarily go after Osama bin Laden, what I'm saying is that we should follow the rule of law, contrary to what Roger has presented. And Roger and I disagree on some things, and we usually smile when we're fighting with each other over these issues. But the rule of law must prevail. Or what separates us from the animals that govern the jungle? Conflict is natural. That is correct. Conflict is natural. But we have this gray matter up here that says that we should find a means of managing, if not resolving, at least managing the conflict before you, and I'm looking at every one of you, before you have to go to war. I was your age when I went to war. And when I came back from it, I have things that I still have to this day as regrets, as nightmares, as horrible experiences in one's life that one has to deal with. No one needs to have cigar-smoking, ball-headed oil executives sending people off to war. The Vietnam War cost $150 billion in 1968 dollars. Where did that money go? Who made the money? My contention is, if you want to know why we're going to war, follow the money. Just follow the money. It's estimated that this war is going to cost approximately $200 billion. It might be an easy strike. It might be within 3 weeks. It might be within 3 months. The war is not the issue. It's the aftermath of the war. That guerrilla warfare that we fought in Vietnam now becomes worldwide. When we attack Saddam Hussein, a man that nobody thinks should be in power, but when we unilaterally take it upon ourselves to become the new empire, the Roman Empire, we will create a recruiting poster for Osama bin Laden and his followers. You see, the Middle East does not look at this as a fight against good and evil. They say, with the president in our White House who's talking with the language. Now, I studied communication, how we use language. And this president is using language like a bully. And sometimes you use strong language, and sometimes you don't. But he's using language as a bully. And I guarantee you this, if you and I were out in the street, and I talked to your neighbors and said that you and 2 other people in your neighborhood were an axis of evil, would you want to sit down and talk about how do we make life safer for all of us? Or would you say, I'm going to kick your ass? What's that? Roger would say that, yeah. But see, Roger's got to catch me, and I know he's got a gimp leg.
The difference is I would pick on the bully.
You'd go after both
Not simply
of them.
the guy that lived across the street.
Well, this is a good opportunity. I think why don't we have each member of the panel ask.
I didn't get my 20 minutes.
I know it escalated out.
It's okay. It's all right.
We'll start with the same order. We'll go with Mr. Leader and pose a question to yourself.
Sure. What do you suggest then, as far as the United Nations and the United States at this time, in terms of taking action or no action? What suggestions do you have, given the notion that weapons of mass destruction are seemingly present in Iraq? Recently, we find that, yes, violations of the UN resolution have been found. We find that unmanned aerial vehicles available. We find that missiles are available. We find that anthrax is there's evidence of anthrax there, though we do not have UN inspectors that can determine that because there's no cooperation from Saddam Hussein. So what suggestions do you have? Either.
Well, my suggestion is to continue with the inspections to see if they work, since we apparently do know that he has chemical and biological weapons. Apparently our U.S. government knows where they are, which seems to be just a simple matter of telling the UN inspectors where to go to find them. And assuming that, if anything, should work. If it does not, then like I said, we have a bigger problem. If UN inspectors don't work in this situation, where we know apparently where he's hiding stuff, or how he's hiding stuff, or that he is hiding stuff, how are they ever going to work with against the likes of North Korea or the other countries that we're going to insist disarm the same weapons as well? In the meantime, I would have the United States endorse and support the International Criminal Court, and without an exception for itself, and use that as the mechanism by which in the future to bring Saddam Hussein to justice, as he will no doubt use crimes against humanity, against his own people, genocide perhaps, war crimes perhaps. It's just a matter of time before he can be charged under this court, and then you have the perfect pretext to go in and nab him via war. Then you have the perfect pretext to go attack Iraq, to bring him to justice before this court. And the pretext is important, because the pretext is it's important that we uphold international law rather than destroy international law or work against international law as much as possible.
I'd like to also add, the President's speech a couple of days ago where he, Colin Powell, the State of the Union and then Colin Powell. The State of the Union, the President said that, in using his words, that Saddam Hussein has material to produce X amount of chemical warfare. He did not say he has those chemicals in hand. He said he has the material to produce that. Our own CIA report is long, and we have to dismiss the British intelligence. They seem to get their information from graduate student doctoral presentations. But our own CIA stated that Saddam Hussein, because of the bombing, tactical, not strategic, but tactical bombing about 4 years ago by this government, we destroyed the material to produce fissile material for nuclear weapons. And even after they get that material, it takes 5 to 10 years after they get that material. But they're 6 to 8 years away from getting it. They're trying to get it. There's no question they're trying to get that, and for obvious reason, if you carry a big stick, nobody's going to beat you up in the neighborhood. So, is it an imminent threat? I say no. I say all the things are there to say we can still engage in having inspectors on the ground. And if not, then tactical bombings, not necessarily strategic bombings, tactical. I would also say this, that I would vote for war, all-out, kick-ass war, if two things, that all of those oil companies that would go in there afterward would not make a profit, that all the money from the oil companies they would make there goes to the families of those that went to war and died in war. Also, that meeting between Dick Cheney, who was a former executive at Halliburton, who made and legally made contact with Saddam Hussein in trading oil with him. If Dick Cheney would make public the U.S. energy policy that Congress is still in court trying to have exposed with the oil executives, not energy policy, our environmental protection policy. If those two things happened, that disclosed what went on with the oil executives, made that public, because our president has said that this country, the democracy, is based on transparency, yet he's the most secretive president since Nixon. And that the oil companies don't make a profit, that the money goes to the populace who fought the war, then I would be more inclined to say, okay, let's go bomb the hell out of them.
Do you gentlemen want to respond, or do you want to
Well, I would just like to say that in response to John's question here, that people that he have talked to, they don't hate us, they simply question our foreign policy.
I don't want to say simply, but yes, go ahead.
But, well, I think that is kind of simply. I think that my experience has been, and I too have traveled, that there is a deep-seated hatred towards Americans. And it has very little to do with foreign policy. It has a lot to do with the fact that we're in their countries and they'll never be in ours. And that we come as tourists, we come as business people, we come as military. And that is the price you pay for being number one. It's just that simple. People hated the Romans not because the Romans came and wrecked their village, just because they were the Romans and they were number one. People hated Britain not because they simply occupied Ireland, but because they're simply number one. And as I mentioned in this very room a couple of months ago when we had a speaker here from Cuba, all of those exiled Cubans that are living in Dade County, when Fidel Castro goes and they all move back to Havana and back to Cuba, they're going to hate our guts because we're number one. It comes with the territory. Grow up. People are going to hate you simply because you're an American and simply because you're on the top of the heap. Period.
I would hope you wouldn't say grow up to me. I'm pretty old. I don't want to get any older.
But John, you would have us believe that, well, if we would okay this stuff if in fact the oil companies would give the money. Well, I hope that the next time it rains, it's beer. But that ain't going to happen. I really hope that's the case. And that is the subtle difference between wishing and hoping. Hoping means there's a snowball's chance in hell. Wishing means there ain't a snowball's chance in hell.
Wishing there is no
You're
hell.
wishing, but don't hope, because that is simplistic.
I disagree. I think that the people hated the Romans because they did wreck their villages. I think people in Ireland hate the British because they are occupying Ireland.
Soldiers make notoriously poor ambassadors.
I'd like to contribute something here concerning this notion of the present presidential administration relationship with oil and things of that nature. Certainly the president, the vice president, national security advisor, and others have significant ties to oil. There's no doubt about that. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, like we discussed before, that we wouldn't be in Iraq or in the Persian Gulf region anyway if it wasn't for oil. We are unfortunately tied to oil. Much of the global economy is tied to oil. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo took place, and this was the first time that the Arab members of OPEC were able to use oil as an economic and strategic weapon to alter U.S. foreign policy. And this is part of the outgrowth of that event. In 1968, 12% of the oil consumed in this country came from imported sources. In 73, 36% came from imported sources. 10 years ago, it was slightly more than half. Now, 56% of the oil we consume comes from imported sources. Granted, there are obviously some selfish concerns in the administration. However, there does appear to be, and I am not privy to any more information than anybody else, but there appears to be some concern with establishing some form of democracy in the Middle East that might diffuse outward, perhaps to Iran. There are reports to indicate that Iraqi citizens are quite sympathetic to the United States, as there are Iranian citizens. People might be ready for a regime change. And with the character of the population as it is today, and with the wealth of resources that happen to be in the area, we really might have an opportunity for democracy to occur in this part of the world, for the United States and other members of the free world to be allied with another oil-producing country that is not necessarily tyrannical. And by the same token, we might be able to engage or take the time to engage in determining what alternative fuels we have available. Those are things we do have to keep concerned.
Could you remind me, the OPEC oil embargo, how was that successful in altering U.S. foreign policy the way the OPEC would have wanted it? Give me the example of how that was done. I don't remember U.S. foreign policy being altered in their favor.
Essentially, a couple of things, and I won't go into I won't go into a lot of detail, but essentially, we agreed to supply many of the Middle Eastern states weapons for for the right to purchase oil from them. We also saw that at this time, the Arab oil embargo of '73 was essentially oriented around the Yom Kippur War, in which European countries at that time, particularly Germany, elected to sympathize with the Arab states as opposed to the United States and the Netherlands at that time, which decided to ally themselves with Israel. Keep in mind, this was during the Cold War, in which the Soviets were supplying the forces on the Arab side in the Yom Kippur War, Syria and Egypt, while the United States was meagerly at that time supporting Israel.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we go into this country as conquering Americans, as liberating Americans, there's two different things that happen there. One is liberating, and that depends on the perception of the people we invade. It's not our perception, it's their perception. If we go in there and we are perceived by them as liberating, then we reduce the aftermath. If we go in there and their perception is that we are conquering, then we are in a quagmire. If we say that we are going to impose upon them some form of democracy in a place where democracy has not flourished ever, where it's an idea associated, democracy only works in a capitalistic state, and if we go in there and we say you're going to become democratic, then we are setting that part of the world up for a bloodbath. Approximately 26% of the population of Iraq is Sunni. 60% of the population of Iraq are Shiite. The Shiites, the Brotherhood in Shiite is in Iran, where the deposed Shah of Iran, after the Shah of Iran and the CIA-backed government there was deposed, the Ayatollah Khomeini and that religious right took over. I can see these people licking their chops and say, all right, now Iraq, if it's going to be democratic, now has 60% Shiite to become more of the mullahs, more of the Taliban. Now, I don't know if that's going to roll out that way or not. But if we impose, if we're perceived to go in there as conquering heroes, that's liberating. That's the bad part of liberating. If we're perceived as conquering heroes or conquering Iraq, then again, we're that recruiting poster. All of these things are, there's a good side, there's a bad side. What's the risk of the bad side versus the risk of the good side?
I think the history is mentioned, is shown, though, that when we went into Afghanistan, we rooted out, as it turned out, to be an incredibly unpopular Taliban. We also rooted out the base for the Al-Qaeda, and we have not imposed our democratic principles there. We're still letting large portions
letting.
Exactly.
We're letting them.
Exactly.
Paternalism.
Because none of them were able to do it without our help.
And
it seems to me that the guy who has the money calls the tunes.
That's true.
We had the money.
You're right.
We're calling the tunes. And what we're saying is we're not imposing our system. We just wanted to get rid of two problems, Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
And we've gotten rid of Taliban, but where in the hell is Osama bin Laden? We were going after Osama bin Laden, an enemy that's hard to fight, a war that's hard to fight. Now we make a right turn and go after Saddam Hussein, a fight we can win, instead of fighting the fight we need to win. Osama bin Laden. 66% of the population of this country fear Osama bin Laden. 10% fear a threat from Saddam Hussein. Why are we spending all of this energy when the real threat here is Osama bin Laden? And nobody's questioning that. Because we can win.
Let's do this. Let's open it up to student questions. I think we're past the halfway point, and we're all interested to hear what you guys have to say. But I want you to speak up so they can hear you down here as well. Go ahead.
Actually, it's my question. Since I'm from Iraq, I would like to answer Mr. Gunn here that this attitude that they hate us because we're American, because we're freedom, is we're going to make the rest of the world, if there is a part of the world that they don't hate the United States, they're going to make them really hate the United States. Really, nobody gives a heck of what's happening in the United States if you don't go there and miss their country. If you know, or I don't know, most of the people in the government deny, Saddam Hussein was recruited by CIA to be president of Iraq. He fought Iran for the United States. He used chemical movement against Iranian, against Iraqi. Nobody opened their mouth because he was doing in favor, capitalizing the Iranian. So people hate the United States because their foreign policy, and usually when its interest for the United States is the structure for the other countries. All the Middle Eastern, this is probably like 70%, the other 30% is because of the Palestinian-Israeli. Let's put the subject aside. We're talking about the Iraqi war. The Iraqi, they don't have hatred for the United States. I'm from there. I don't have to lie here. I can say, hey, Iraqi hate the United States. I'm not, but they don't. Actually, they favor the United States have a war with Iraq, get rid of Saddam. They say, well, the devil who's going to steal our oil won't kill us better than the devil who's killing us, and we still don't get anything from the oil. Every day the Iraqis pray, please God, dry the oil in our land, because all what they get from it is killing and destruction and war. But they also know that if the Americans want to get rid of Saddam Hussein, I'm not saying easily, they can do it, but they don't do it because they want to send their army and occupy the country so they will control the oil after the new government. Because if they don't do this, they will never control the government who's going to rule Iraq, which is going to give the oil products to other countries. They can assassinate them. I am not very sure, but I feel they participate in the failure of the revolution attempt of the Iraqi to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Once Saddam Hussein gets sick, a French helicopter comes to Baghdad, have a 2-week surgery and medication for him and go. Don't tell me they cannot kill him. And
Give him a chance
the
to
minister
respond.
down here, he was absolutely, I agree with that. I agree.
Mr. DeVigo? Yeah, okay.
Could he restate the question?
More of a statement.
I think that there's no question about it that the United States projects an image beyond simply our government. It is projected through tourism. It is projected through businesses. And there is, in fact, a backlash in Syria, in Morocco, in Chad, that is clearly anti-American, and it's simply because we're Americans. And certainly there are times when, in Northern Ireland, people hated the British because they took over, but there were also people throughout the world that hate the British just because they're the British. And they had an empire, and they did run everything out of London. And the same thing is happening with us.
If they have their freedom, they don't care what's going on here.
We're not there to export freedom.
You're there.
We're there to exploit.
Who kill them become dictators.
We are there
So
to
they can
export.
give you what you want.
Exactly. Exactly.
Look, if there's
Exactly.
democracy in Saudi Arabia,
Exactly.
the United States won't get the oil.
Hey,
They chose for these
the
people
fact
to
of the
stay.
matter is there's more support in Saudi Arabia for Al-Qaeda than any other place in the world. More of the guys that were terrorists were from Saudi Arabia than any place else. The fact of the matter is, it's to our benefit to keep Saudi Arabia there.
We are Muslims. No, generally, I'm not saying particularly. We're getting blamed for an action from a guy who was supported by the United States.
Okay, let's try to take another question. I'm sure we're not all going to agree after today. So go ahead, you in the back of the green there.
Yeah. I was going to ask, you said if we are...
Who are you addressing your question to, by the way? Mr. Schlosser?
Yes. Well, earlier you were talking about we're number one and we have the responsibility. You know, if you're number one, then you have to have the responsibility. You say we have to, we should that have the responsibility to keep peace and war to make peace. You can't make peace with war. It's like you can't keep a full tank of gas and want to go for a joyride too. You can't.
Why not?
You can't keep a full tank of gas and go for a joyride.
Yeah, you just don't use that car. See, those are two mutually exclusive problems that you're talking about here. Since the founding of the League of Nations and the United Nations, the basic principle has been throughout the 20th century, to maintain peace, you must constantly be at war, and constant war maintains peace. It is a deterrent. And so unlike Mr. Sinclair, I would think that about the next time somebody comes up with a nuclear weapon, if in fact you go to them, and I think that ultimately we are going to deal with Korea. It came out this morning that they do have a delivery system now that can reach North America. But right now our plate is full. We do have the problem with Al-Qaeda. We do have the continuing problem with Saddam Hussein. And yes, you're absolutely right. It was in our interest to support him at one point. It is now not in our interest. Anybody in this room have parents that are divorced? It was in your parents' interest at one time to live with each other. It is now in their interest not to. That is a fact. It changes. And you people, Arabs, tend to look upon this as a crusade, that this is Westerners coming to destroy Islam. Isn't that what has been said?
This attitude will take this country to
But
war
that's what,
and hatred.
but that is what is being said in the Arab world.
Let's take another
In the Arab world, that's what's being said.
Go ahead.
I'd like to ask a series of short questions for the pro-war side. Well, would you agree that nuclear disarmament in the Middle East is a priority in the United States?
Sure.
Okay. Would you also
I would say
agree
no.
that
I'd say no.
you would say no?
Yes, Israel has nuclear weapons.
Okay, okay.
It is a
Would you
priority not to have.
consider Israel as a member of the Middle East?
Yes.
Okay. And would you consider that by failing to disarm Israel as well as Iraq, we would be undermining the entire process? So not only undermining the process, but we would be driving a spike between Arabs and Jews. So right there, we're causing problems. We're going in and causing these problems by saying our Jewish friends, and mind you, I have Jewish heritage, so I'm not trying to offend anyone, but our Jewish friends that give us money in Capitol Hill are influencing our policy right now. We go in and we say, well, Israel can have their weapons, but since our Arab friends aren't giving us money, our Arab friends aren't helping us, well, they're not going to have nuclear weapons. So I think that...
Helping us? What do you mean by helping us?
Well,
Israel has helped us over the years.
yes, that's
The
true.
only way that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait have helped us is with their oil. They can't do anything with it. They haven't gotten off their duff to do anything with it. We've done it. We've drilled it. We've shipped it. We've turned it into stuff. And now if they have weapons, I'm not against guys that have weapons in this country that are registered. I'm only against guys in this country who have weapons who are not. When was the last time you heard of a guy from the NRA that robbed a bank, robbed a grocery store, killed somebody? You haven't. It's the illegal guys with the illegal weapons that are doing it. If you've got Israel that seems to be somewhat responsible, that's one thing. When you have a country that isn't, they can have the same weapon, but if they are irresponsible, isn't it in our interest to
would say-
neutralize them?
Yeah. Israel.
You guys, hold on. I think we have to ask one question at a time. So do you have a
Can
question?
we rebut that though? That answer?
Sure. Let them respond, and then you can ask your question.
When has Israel ever been of any help to the United States?
During
During
both
the-
of the wars, 68,
67.
67 and in 73.
Israeli
They ended up shooting down an awful lot of Soviet aircraft, capturing an awful lot of Soviet weaponry that was shipped to the United States and analyzed.
After they analyzed it and decided what they wanted to send to us, they also sank one of our frigates.
The USS
battle.
Liberty was,
That's right.
was
Yes.
attacked by the Israelis in 1967 because they just so happened to be in the area and they were spying on
The Israelis,
And
and
the
the
Isra-
Israelis knew it.
The Israelis
The
attacked
reality
knowing-
of the Cold War was that the Soviets supported insurrection in certain parts of the world, and the U.S. had allies in certain parts of the world. In the Middle East, Israel was a U.S. ally, surrounded by unfriendlies to them, and the Soviets supported Syria and Egypt, especially during the 73 war. Again, this was during the Cold War, in which we have to recall there was a threat of nuclear holocaust, imagined or real.
I still don't see how that helped the United States in any way. Being a,
Israel is the largest recipient of foreign aid to this country, and I'm not suggesting that Israel should not be. But for Israel to operate in good faith, Ariel Sharon, who is known by the Palestinians as a mass murderer, Ariel Sharon, in the 101 Brigade, and somebody gave a look like, well, what do you mean? The 101 Brigade, he led guerrillas into Palestine and massacred several hundred people. Plus, and what are the names of the two villages in Lebanon? Remember that in '82? Tiala?
They killed like 10,000 people.
No, it was about 1,200 people, but it was
10,000.
yeah. But anyway, Ariel Sharon is not looked on by the Palestinians as someone who operates on good faith. He is negotiating. He's their leader. At the same time, developing more settlements, saying, yes, we will talk about not having settlements, and he's talking about that, adding more settlements. That adds fuel to the fire to all the Middle East. So for us not to do anything in the Middle East, and then to do, with Israel and the Palestinians, and to sit back and say, that's not my job, and then to go over and say, let's bomb the hell out of Iraq, boy, that sends a mixed signal to the Iranians, the Iraqis, the Syrians, the Saudis, the Yemenis. It sends this terribly mixed signal, and there's another question over there.
Let's allow this young lady to ask her question.
I'm just kind of adding to that, and then I have a question about our consistency with U.S. foreign policy. We're not.
There's no
consistent.
consistency in
There is
U.S.
no
foreign.
consistency,
No.
and that's why I think that
We're going to
support.
support whoever helps us. It's
Exactly.
just that simple.
Corporate agenda.
That's what happens.
Exactly.
That's
So what
reality.
happens here.
That's
Why
reality.
people hate us, it's not because we're Americans. It's because of our foreign policy.
No, it's because Americans drive big cars and we support American policy.
Turkey and Israel have more weapons of mass destruction. Israel is breaking over 25 UN resolutions right now, and we're targeting a country that has been decimated by sanctions, where before 1991, the largest child problem was obesity, and now you have 5,000 children a month dying of curable diseases like diarrhea. Iraq was a wealthy nation before the sanctions, and that's why, right now they're having so many economic problems is because the food for oil program's not working and all these programs aren't working. So I'm wondering, my question is the United States is the largest weapons manufacturer in the world, and so how are we responsible for the violence that is occurring? And we didn't say a thing when Iraq gassed the Kurds, even though they were our allies and they got those weapons from us. I guess I want to know, how are we responsible for this violence? Because we're providing the weapons and we're making money off of them.
That's our largest export too.
Yeah, I know it. The second largest one is entertainment, Bon Jovi. Madonna, aren't you proud? That's what you stand for. That's what you stand for. John says we belong to a democracy. Why aren't you changing it? Because there's not enough people like you that want to change it. Apparently the majority of the people are pretty satisfied with what we've got. And if what we've got is exploiting other people, that's exactly what happens, because that is human nature.
My question is, how are we responsible for the violence in the Middle East due to our buying and selling and producing of weapons of mass destruction?
I'm not sure if the local guy in a hardware sells a gun to somebody and that gun is stolen from somebody, that the guy in the hardware or the manufacturer is responsible. I don't think he is.
These weapons aren't stolen. These are weapons.
that were given during the period when we supported them.
But what I'm saying, yeah, exactly, we gave Iraq and Saddam Hussein those weapons when we supported him.
Sure.
And now we want to disarm him, but we're not going to
Yes.
disarm Israel or Turkey.
Because they're not a problem.
Okay, let's get another question. How about you in the corner?
My question's for anybody on the board. It's my understanding that Iraq has materials to produce weapons of mass destruction, and as Mr. Foster stated, North Korea now has a delivery system where they can now bomb the U.S. Why is there such a decided lack of anger and just horror at the fact that North Korea can now bomb us, and Iraq maybe in 10 years can?
I'd like to address that initially. That the rhetoric of war is a very interesting thing, and that is that as long as and Roger's right to some degree, when he says this about, and it's very Orwellian, that if I keep you, the population, in a state of mind that you're at war, whether we're at war or not, if I keep you in that state of mind that we're at war, and especially someplace that's foreign to you, someplace you've never been, someplace whose names you can't pronounce, then I can control you. And that's, in essence, I can have you do what I want you to do for the sake of national security. Now, to go directly, I believe this is what's going to happen. And why we're not doing anything is because the rhetoric of war is not pointed to North Korea. If we get ground troops in Iraq, in Baghdad, if they get in a quagmire of house-to-house fighting, if that happens, North Korea, I'm thinking, will attack South Korea as a bargaining chip and say, you have to leave us alone, not attack us, give us guarantees, international trade, blah, 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 blah. We are going to blackmail you. And if you do this, then we'll pull back to the previous DMZ. North Koreans have a 1 million-man army. And as was reported, it was late last night, that they have a delivery system to hit us in the northern hemisphere. With North Korea. I said, did I say Iraq? I said North Korea. Theoretically, yes, according to their weights and measures of that. Now, the only reason we're not making a big thing about that is oil. That's the only reason, oil.
I don't see the reason for attacking Iraq as being oil. I think that, whoever controls the oil still has to sell it in the same place on the world market, otherwise there's no point to having oil. And they're not going to be able to discriminate in who they sell to. The most that can happen is maybe U.S. companies or whichever company might get a cut of the profits. In answer to the question in the back, Saddam Hussein and Iraq do not have the materials to make a nuclear weapon. If they had the enriched uranium that they need, they could build one. It's not that hard. Getting the enriched uranium is the hard part. You need about 10 pounds, as I understand it. And it's not just any uranium, but a specific isotope. And so of which I think of natural occurring uranium, I think the particular isotope is like only 1%. So you really have to kind of accumulate a lot of uranium before you have the enriched uranium that you need. And I don't know if I believe the CIA just because they say North Korea can hit the United States. I'm a little aghast by the amount of people and the number of people who take the administration's word for everything. They have a vested interest in having us believe that North Korea can hit the United States because they want to build this nuclear missile defense system, and they see that as that is a potential motive. I don't know whether they have a missile that can reach the United States or not, but you have to be questioning everything this administration is saying. You can't take everything at face value.
Well, something like that I'm thinking when I look at the North Korea thing and Iraq is we already have our hands kind of dirty with the Iraq thing. We're already really involved with that. North Korea, if we even went there, we would just be opening something that we can't control. I mean, if you look at it, there's million troops, so close to Asian, other
say it's a different situation,
I'd say it's a
completely different.
Can
All
I
right,
interject something?
let's take a question from here, and then you can.
My question is, I have an answer that I already know, but I want to ask you, is this war against Islam, or is it against quote-unquote terrorists? Because what it looks like it is a war against terrorism, a war against Islam masked under the guise of terrorism. And Saddam Hussein, per se, for example, he only shot down one of our planes within the last 12 years. And then we say he's poisoned his own people. Well, I know here in 1989, President Bush's father let a whole bunch of drugs come into this country. And I also know that the AIDS was invented, a man-made disease. And that's the same thing to me. It sounds like we're poisoning our own people. But the main question was, do you think this is a war on terrorism or a war against Islam? But it looks like it's a war against Islam, because from what it said, that Korea is a bigger threat than Saddam Hussein.
It's not a war against either. It's a war against Saddam Hussein and his supporters. I don't agree with you on the AIDS, but the United States has had a history of poisoning its own people. You're correct there. I mean,
Guy just out here in Byron Center last night.
yeah, but that wasn't the U.S. government. But I'm talking about the U.S. government.
Might have been.
But it was an
Might have been
American.
You know,
You teach poli-sci. The people of the United States are the government. We the people.
Mike, did you?
I know you're the government, Roger. I figured that out.
Let Mr. DeVivo make a statement.
Yeah,
We'll take some more questions.
there's some questions concerning why we don't do anything about Israel or North Korea at the moment. And according to some analyst reports, it just appears that Iraq's on our plate at the moment. We'll deal with it. When we're finished dealing with Iraq, then we push Sharon to be more amenable to the development of two states in Israel slash Palestine, and we also engage in dialogue with North Korea. Now, I'm only reporting what I've read concerning some analyst comments. So.
Why dialogue, though? Why don't we just invade them?
Let's take a question. How about you right there?
It's not in our interest.
The pro-war board, in their opening statements, made an issue about principle versus popularity, and that we are parents. Well, my whole thing is, maybe we're just teenagers that think we're parents. And if you ask a 14-year-old or a child, they think they're an adult. They think they're adult enough to make those decisions.
And in fact, they're going to be a parent, whether they like it or not.
They made an adult decision while they were a child.
No, they made a child decision while they were a child, and now they're going to be a parent.
But given that they were a child that made an irresponsible decision, maybe we're just children that are making an irresponsible decision. And whose principles do we use, if not the popularities?
We have basic principles within the Constitution of the United States, which we claim are inalienable. They're not just for Americans.
But to terrorists, they claim stuff from their religion that says that.
We're not claiming it from religion. We're claiming it from the state of nature. Not the state of grace. Believe me, not the state of grace.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question specifically for clarification, because I've been hearing it a lot, and you said it today, dealing with Ariel Sharon and the state of Israel and the creation of the state of Palestine. It's my understanding that the state of Palestine was created during the same time the state of Israel was created, and that state or country is Jordan, which is, I guess, about 80% Palestinian. And if you actually do an etymological research of the word Palestinian, there is no such thing as a Palestine or a Philistine.
Mm-hmm.
They were all destroyed.
Mm-hmm. And
Jordan is not Palestine. No. Less than 50% of the population of Jordan is Palestinian. But there are a lot of Palestinians, former refugees from the area the British called Palestine. There was never a state of Palestine that was independent. Palestine was a British mandate given to them from the Turkish Empire after the First World War.
Not given to them. They won it.
They took it.
And
Lawrence of Arabia.
I'll agree with that.
It should be noted that in '48, when Israel declared statehood and excuse me, by declaration of the United Nations, by the way, 2 states were awarded to this region, an independent Arab Muslim state and an independent Jewish state. Israel declared statehood. The independent Arab Muslim state, after much conflict, was absorbed by the country of Jordan. And then, of course, many years of conflict took place in which some territories became disputed.
Your question was too hard. You cleared the room.
Well, just one real quick point of clarification, about a minute here. And that is, the Arab state, the UN had set up that the state of Israel could be formed, but it had to be with the appreciation, if not less, the vote of the Palestinians. And then the British left, or the UN left the British were going to leave, and they unilaterally said, Palestine, you can become a state, or Israel, you can become a state, which insulted the Palestinians. In other words, even back then, at the very beginning, the Palestinians did not get a voice.
That's right.
True. And under the Ottoman Turks as well.
Yeah.
To kind of rip this topic back to U.S. foreign policy, I really kind of want to bounce this idea off the panel, is that the United States has all these pillars of democracy and all these great ideas about this fabulous nation that we're supposed to be. That's kind of very based on Locke saying. Well, when in actual practice and when things come down to the real world the way they are, it's a lot more Hobbes-like. Democracy, like communism, looks absolutely perfect on paper, but when it comes to actually practice it, you can't walk that line with those ideals. You can't be perfect in everything you do. The United States will support or declare war on anyone at any given time, depending on how we view them. And different administrations view people in different ways. I mean, administrations that say Carter would set up, Reagan would knock down. It's a question of the U.S., their view. We don't have an entrenched history like a lot of nations do. We have a tendency to either A, forgive, B, forget, or just let it go, period. U.S. foreign policy, if it can change back in, it can change back and forth.
It's very pragmatic.
Exactly. I mean, we take more of a practical stance. We don't have an entrenched moral code that we follow no matter what, no matter the administration, no matter the nation. We form it depending on the situation, and there's variables there that are different every single time.
I would agree with you, and I would want the administration to talk that. In other words, don't give me, it's freedom, it's this and that. It's exactly pragmatic. And don't give me the bull. Give me the truth.
Exactly.
Because I think most educated people are saying, I don't want to hear the rhetoric, the persuasive offerings of somebody. I want to hear substance. And that's one of the things that I find our president really lacking in, anything with substance.
And America cannot simply walk that moral tightrope. No one has, a perfect set of morals, regardless of the nation. No one gets that moral high ground, no matter how bad we want to put ourselves there. Maybe we can, get an arm up there, maybe a foot, but there's no way we can get our entire body up there.
Does anybody else want to respond to that?
What's the question?
Well, it's a statement. He has to respond.
It's an idea. I mean, it's an idea, and I just want to know what you guys think.
Well, I differed with you when you said that on paper democracy looks perfect. To me, democracy does not look perfect.
He said something about moral high ground really quickly, that today's moral high ground is a descendant of the moral high ground that we claim to fight communism. The communists of yesterday and the whole reason for McCarthyism, and there's a commie, a red behind every rock, is now switched to there's a terrorist, or there's a Muslim, or there's an Iraqi, or there's a Filipino, or a Colombian. Whoever we don't like, we have the moral high ground now because they're the bad guy. We have to destroy them.
Well, let's face it, the whole idea of terrorism now has been swept with a broad brush.
Well, that's what the administration is doing.
Exactly.
Instead of identifying local and
but what it
territorial
also
ones.
boils down to is the fact that today, with a dirty bomb, if I were a terrorist today, I would come to Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Nobody
you want to know
expected.
why? What do you got in your museum for the next couple of months?
That's right, that's East Girls.
This is the banks of the mighty Grand River in the shadow of
I'm
Free
leaving
Enterprise
now,
at Amway. I mean, if you were going to strike a blow for Al
American-
Qaeda,
yeah.
I think, wouldn't you do it in Grand Rapids, Michigan?
Absolutely.
I sure as hell would. You'd Amway and the Dead Sea Scrolls,
All in one.
and I'd do it with a dirty bomb.
Roger's also selling duct tape and plastic out of
Out of the back of my van.
So many questions. Okay, terrorism, you brought it up about terrorism. First, the president was saying, we're fighting terrorism, we're being good people, being peace. And suddenly he brings up Saddam Hussein being the bad guy, of course. And then it's the same war on Saddam, this is war on Iraq. And everybody says Arabs, Arabs, Arabs. There is Christians living in Arabs. There's a lot of people who are Christians, Muslims, and different varieties of Muslims. So there's not really one kind. He says Shia, Sunni, So then some people believe it differently. Now, something came on today's show where the lady was showing wail. Why are you covering your hair? She said, this is my religion, and I respect it. You should not cover your hair. And she started proving that she was wrong when she's doing a big mistake. Who are you to say what she's doing wrong or not? Like, I'm wearing a short skirt, okay, and walking down the street, that's okay, because American people wear it. If I cover up, why are you covering up? You should show yourself. I can study, I can work with my covered, or I can walk when I'm half naked. It doesn't matter. So you think it's okay when you're half naked, or it's wrong when you're all covered. What they do is stereotype. To find something wrong about other countries, they have women can't do this, women can't do that, so they're bad people. Which is, then of course after Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden, they couldn't find him, so they have to find somebody else to attack. Now the whole thing about being a full plate depends how big your plate is, then you can say it's full. First they had Israel and Palestine. They couldn't finish that, so they have leftovers put in the fridge, and they go into Osama bin Laden. He cannot finish that either. He can't find him. Sorry, that's
Warming drawer.
Yeah,
That's
he's
in the
on
warming.
vacation. He needs some rest. Osama bin Laden to gather his people. So they had he's dead. Oh, sorry. So wasn't Saddam Hussein dead when the Gulf War was there? He came alive again. Okay, same thing. Now Osama bin Laden is nowhere to be seen, and now he's going to come back alive again. Okay, now Saddam Hussein, they're going to target him because President Bush, Senior, George Bush Senior, couldn't finish Saddam Hussein's problem by going back and finishing his father's.
What country are you from in ethnicity?
I was born in Kuwait.
In Kuwait.
There, but I'm Indian nationality.
Okay, thank you.
So we're talking about why people hate the U.S. There's a lot of reasons. Okay, one of the reasons is terrorism and fighting war, and second thing is that America has that big foot. It has to put the fingers everywhere. You have Mickey D's, TGI Fridays in India. I have no idea. They had never had TGI Fridays and Mickey D's in India. But it's cool. Progress, business is different. But putting your business in everybody else's business causes a problem. If I come to your house and say, I don't like that shirt you're wearing, can you change it for me? No, I like red, I like purple, no. Then you're going to get pissed if I come every day and every day and every day. I'm sorry, I cannot change what I have. I don't like what you're wearing. In America, we wear this.
Okay, I think you could let them respond for a second. That's okay.
But I think the subtle difference is that you can tell me you don't like it, but if I was part of the Taliban, I would arrest you. It's not just a question that I didn't like what you wore. What you were wearing was against the law.
Okay. Taliban was ruled by men, first of all.
Damn right.
He's kidding.
Who would be?
He's kidding.
I don't think. See,
Let's
what
have
happens is that
some
the-
other.
Okay, we-
Let me explain one.
1 minute.
Okay. The explanation of the Taliban was, when you give power to all men, they're going to rule. And they open a contest from the text from the Quran, and they go, woman's supposed to cover, woman's supposed to protect you, which does go in hand. They're not saying they're perfect, they're fanatics. But don't blame the whole Arab world and the whole Muslims for that. This is going to cause a war between Christians, Judaism, and Islam. And God forbid, but there might be, most likely will be a third world war.
Okay, very good. Do you guys want to respond or take other questions?
Well, I think she covered it pretty well. Chris has been with his hand up.
Go
here,
ahead. Go ahead, sir.
I would just like to know we got some people in Guantanamo Bay who are, I guess, part of Al-Qaeda. But what does an Al-Qaeda person look like? You know what I mean? What does that bad person...
Blonde hair, blue eyes.
You know what I mean? I really don't know, you know what I mean? And that's what I was just wanting to ask. Like, everywhere around the world, it's like, yeah, there's links to Al-Qaeda, but no one ever knows who Al-Qaeda is, besides, like, Bin Laden's, like, the head of Al-Qaeda, you know what I mean?
See, they cannot pronounce the name. That's the whole tactic. Al-Qaeda, ooh, what?
I don't know that you guys can answer that, can you?
No. I don't think we know who they are. Under international law, they were supposed to be prisoners of war. This administration called them enemy combatants, and thus they are not granted the rights of a prisoner of war. And anybody found in this country that that's a U.S. citizen is not granted legal rights under the Constitution. This stuff scares the crap out of me here. You know, all of this. You can be arrested 25 miles from Canada without warrant. No search and seizure or
That's
qualification there that you're protected by.
That's both national and
Heaven
international
forbid you're
law.
Muslim and you want to attend flight school.
Question is for Mr. Soldier. Okay, you said we need constant war to maintain constant peace. So the Japanese business is war, right?
Yeah,
Thus, constant war can be economic in nature.
no question.
Like the bully on the block, you know, I get the parents to ground them. Okay, this is responsible because we are responding. If we cut them off from every source of income, like this is Iraq, if we cut them off from every source of income, you know, such as a blockade or economic sanctions, and make it so bad that people have to rebel, wouldn't that save our military's lives? Rebellions have worked before. I mean, look at us as a country. And I would think that the Iraqis would have the responsibility to take the risk, if it's death, to overthrow their leader, because that way we are not going in and conquering them. They're liberating themselves, and I think it makes it takes a lot of pressure off of us. And I would just ask, you know, isn't that possible? Don't we still have avenues with economic, you know, sanctions and other ways of going about this than urban warfare? And I know we've got a lot of people who fought in Vietnam, and that is bloody, and we're going to take a lot of casualties. So I would ask that question.
Yeah, watch Black Hawk Down. That's going to show you what it could be like.
Urban warfare, yeah.
But what it also boils down to is that we heard that, well, if we would lift the sanctions, there wouldn't be all these children dying, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if he wasn't spending his money on arms, we're not holding a gun to his head and telling him to buy our stuff. If he wasn't supporting arms deals, developing nuclear weapons, he might be able to afford medicine for his own people. He could start selling the oil again on the open market. It wouldn't be limited. So yeah, the onus is on him. And he's apparently willing to let his own people die.
And if it's so bad for his own people dying, wouldn't they take up arms against him? Isn't that
Well, apparently what it is such a totalitarian regime that it's unhealthy to even try it. As Mr. Sinclair pointed out, he's killed people of his own family, his own tribe.
They torture their own Olympic athletes.
Let's have this young lady ask her question.
I can talk, yes. Okay. Recent developments about Iraq have shown that maybe Saddam Hussein is willing to sit down and have a conversation. Maybe he is willing to let us in on some of these investigations into his weapons and his documents and his books and these things. But it seems like the Bush administration is saying, well, it doesn't matter if we can find a diplomatic solution to this. It doesn't matter what he says now. He's going to back away anyway. Do you think that's kind of saying it doesn't matter if we have a good reason to go into war with you? We're still going to do it anyway because we want oil.
No, we're looking for a good reason. We have bent over backwards. The government of the United States has given him a lot of time. He has abused it. He's taken advantage of it. He has broken international law.
But that's not the only alternative we have. We broke international law when we invaded Panama. We broke international law when we mined the
But there
harbors
was
in
nobody as
Nicaragua.
big as us to tell us
And
we
that's
better
the
not
point.
do it.
There was nobody saying we better
You're
not do it.
absolutely right, and that's
That's
the
right.
way it is.
And let me say, wait a minute.
Jeez, John, you just proved our case.
Thank you.
Yes,
the rule
thank you.
of law must prevail no matter how big a bully one is. Now, to go back to
The biggest bully makes the law. It's just
and that's
that
what
simple.
and that's what it boils down to. Wait, folks, wait a minute. I want to answer this question here, and that is the worst possible thing that could happen to President Bush right now is for Saddam Hussein to say the books are open, because then the people of Iraq, will be able to say we will control our destiny versus President Bush controlling the destiny of the oil field. And how dare those Iraqis have our oil under their sand?
Wait a minute. President Bush is not concerned about anything except removing Saddam Hussein. That regime change has been this Bush administration's driving goal from the very beginning.
Why don't you turn the DVD thing on?
Semantics. He's worried about. Once Saddam is gone, his gripe with Iraq will be over. And it's just that the administration lacks a more creative approach than just outright invasion. This is the only way they know how to do it.
Let's let the Sheikh make his question.
Question for anyone on the board who's seen the commercials. How does buying a dime bag support terrorism?
I can answer that.
Yeah. I can answer that very. Are you going to go ahead? Go ahead.
I can answer that. Yeah. It's not specifically terrorism that it supports, but it does. By buying illegal drugs, you do support the people who sell it illegally and who produce it. Yes, exactly. That's true. I'm not saying that certain drugs shouldn't be legal or illegal. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it does contribute to the crime.
Well, I know I'm just the moderator, but let me say this. If you make this war of terrorism a black and white thing, where all terrorists are bad, it depends on who's defining a terrorist. And I think Latin American nations have a vested interest in American military aid and American economic aid to fight the drug war in their countries. It helps keep them in power. It helps maintain their regimes. And I think those commercials are directed at that. That's, in my opinion, down the road. That'll be coming.
One really good example of how it aids terrorism. Pablo Escobar blew up planes. He killed people. That guy was a monster. And how was he aided? Well, he was a drug lord. That's what he was. I mean, he made all his money off of America. They bought his drugs. He blew up planes. He was
but that's an expanded definition of the word terror. He's a mobster and a killer of a lot of people, but not necessarily a terrorist by how it's defined in international terms.
Well, how is it defined in international terms?
In international terms, I defined it earlier. It's territorial, it's ideological, and it's stateless. Territorial is like you've given to my demands, and we'll be. We'll change the government, like the Zapatistas in Mexico,
or George Washington in this country.
Yeah, exactly, or the Israelis against the British.
The Bush administration is not in a war against all terrorism. It's in a war against Al Qaeda, and it has to say it's against a war against all terrorism to pay lip service to other countries who have their own grievances against their own. Rebel movements,
and who can help us.
But the Bush administration is not really serious about anything other than Al Qaeda and Saddam Hussein.
That drug you watch. Go ahead, you had your hand up.
One thing that a lot of people I think are overlooking is it's not necessarily oil itself, because Alaska's oil reserves at our current rate of consumption have over 140 years of providable oil for us, which is, a much overlooked fact. The fact is, it's a cost matter. We can mine that oil, but it'll cost us a lot more. We don't want to pay, America as a whole doesn't want to pay prices that it would cost us as Americans to mine that, because we'd be paying the same for fuel as Europe, as most of England.
And the Bush administration does not want to drill for oil off the coast of Florida because of Jeb Bush being governor of Florida.
He wouldn't get reelected.
He would not get reelected the next time.
There are oil reserves that the U.S. could use, so that's not a main. It is an issue, but it's a financial issue. It's not the key issue.
Well, why not?
Florida and Alaska are closer to home,
Yeah, well, he's willing to drill in Alaska. It's not Florida. He said no way will they drill. He allowed drilling off the coast of Florida.
And it's probably easier to invade Alaska than it is Florida.
Let's take one more question, and I think then we'll wrap it up for the day. You back there, black sweater.
Could you speak up, please?
Why don't we make a commercial that says if you drive an SUV, you could be supporting terrorists?
Well, I think there's a religious commercial that's like that already. What would Jesus drive?
You want one more? Go ahead. We'll let this guy have the last word.
It's a very quick question because I want to have follow-up on it. Do you gentlemen know how many children under the age of 9 or 8 died in Iraq because of the sanction from 91 to 97?
Some people say about 500,000.
500,000 out of 22 million population. My follow-up is, first, is it worth it? Second, is the United States should be considered as a terrorist? Because they provide Saddam Hussein with the power to stay in power. They provided him with the chemical and biological weapon, and the Iraqi children paid for it.
We are empowering Saddam Hussein. Those people must go to Saddam for food. We are leaving these people no option. Go to your dictator and get your food.
All right, let's let these guys give one final word each one of them if they want to, and we'll be done. I think this is it. Go ahead.
Or no,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. What he said is kind of true, but are you willing to pay something for life, for freedom? You know, we need that. People gonna die, but you know, it's always a price to pay. Nothing is for the
Is not enough payment?
But you know what? Just hold on. Listen to me. You think, okay, that nothing is for free. You have to pay. If my country would happen this, I would be my life for free. That's how. It's not a greater power. It's the, you know, natural.
Do you have any idea how many people get executed trying to do the revolution? Do you have any idea how many people died in 2 or 3 wars? Being people kicked out of the country, people tortured by the Western countries and by Saddam himself, which is their political power.
I don't think it's American. It's your own government. It's your own government.
Who put our government?
Okay, guys. Pastor Slash was waving his hand down here. He's part of the debate.
For the last 12 years, we have tried to take him out of that position. And the French, the Germans, most of the other people surrounding it have given us flack. So if you want to point a finger, we admit we made a mistake 13 years ago. Since we've been trying to do it, lots of Iraqis and lots of other people have badmouthed us for trying to do it. So before you start pointing a finger at me, I would maybe take a look at your own family history.
During the 91 war, 2/3 of Iraq was already gone to the people. When Bush decided to take all his army back and let Saddam Hussein use their planes to crash all the revolutionary, and he killed 100,000 Iraqis.
That's right.
I must be the worst moderator in the world. Go ahead, Mr. Diaz. You guys will have to hold back for a second.
If Keith is right in indicating that Saddam Hussein seeks to merely survive and control, perhaps we will see negotiations taking place in which Saddam Hussein is placed in exile, perhaps in Saudi Arabia. If Juan is right, then perhaps Bush and his cronies, as well as the elements of the 1st Marine Division, the 2nd Marine Division, and the 82nd Airborne, 101 Air Mobile, and whatnot, will no longer be needed in Iraq, although I suppose you debate whether they're needed now. And perhaps we will see the beginning of a democratic federation. The beginning, not something that's going to happen overnight. The bottom line is, we're there now. We are there, and something's going to happen, whether we like it or not. most analysts seem to believe that an invasion or liberation will take place. It's up to the United States, regardless of what Roger says, to maintain the upper moral hand. So.
That is the upper moral hand. It's called Machiavellianism.
The prince.
It really boils down to who has a better read on the Iraqi people. George Bush feels that the Arabs in Iraq will welcome us as liberators, and Osama bin Laden, I think, is equally looking forward to the invasion of Iraq because he feels that the Arabs will look at us as oppressors and rise up and join him in his struggle against the United States. Time will tell who's correct. As far as weapons of mass destruction, the only weapons of mass destruction that the United States is on record as opposing is the chemical and biological weapons. And the only reason we oppose them is because we have nuclear weapons, and it's better. And the U.S. is not opposed to using nuclear weapons. In fact, on the contrary, the U.S. has always said that we are free to use nuclear weapons anytime, anywhere that we feel it's necessary, even in a first strike preemptive situation. We told the Soviets that if they invaded Western Europe, even conventionally, that our response would be nuclear. We always said we would go nuclear first. We've told Saddam Hussein in no uncertain terms that if he uses chemical weapons against us, we will go nuclear. We will attack him with nuclear weapons. Is that a bluff? Your guess is as good as mine. But we are not on record as being opposed to using nuclear weapons.
When I was in Vietnam, I had the occasion to be in a number of different villages and talk to a number of different people in the villages. And one of the things that I would ask, and the response was, I don't care who runs the country. I just want to farm. I don't care who the boss is. Just let me farm. Now, put that aside for just a second. In 1982, Ariel Sharon allowed the Christian militia in the Lebanese Civil War into 2 villages. He was Secretary of Defense for Israel at the time. And over 1,200 men, women, and children were killed by these were Muslim villages and the Christian militia. And that's the war in Lebanon was between the Christians and the Muslims. The Christian militia came in there and massacred over 1,200 men, women, and children as the Israeli troops were around the villages, and some of the Israeli soldiers had to seek psychiatric treatment afterward because they heard the screaming and the yelling for over 2 days of that slaughter. The last Lebanese Christian militia officer was just assassinated this past summer. It's 20 years later. If we're making a mistake here, we are setting up a war that I don't have to get you today. I can get you 20 years from now. And it doesn't have to be you, it could be your children. The warning was when the World Trade Towers were hit, if they wanted to kill just Americans, they would have hit football fields on Sunday afternoon. They hit the trade towers because that's a symbol of capitalism. They hit the Pentagon because it's a symbol of how we keep capitalism in force in their country. If they really wanted people, they would have hit all the sports arenas on Sunday afternoon.
Right. Thank you.